Las Vegas is arguably one of the most sought-after destinations in the world. The larger-than-life hotel, resort, and casino industry have fueled the need for widespread housing and commercial developments. And for decades, the Las Vegas Valley has been one of the most rapidly growing regions in the country. However, in 1989, the development community faced a new and unexpected challenge when the desert tortoise was listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act.
1989 was a time of tremendous growth in Clark County. The economy was humming along and people were getting jobs.
Well, the Mirage had just opened and it was big news on the Strip, but what that meant was lots of jobs and lots of people moving to town to take advantage of those jobs. And so there was a lot of pre-development happening, a lot happening in the home building industry.
The desert tortoise emergency listing came about as a result of some field work on desert tortoises that was being done in the California part of the Mojave Desert. When the desert tortoise was emergency listed, it meant development stopped. It was then against federal law to continue development activities in desert tortoise habitat.
The desert tortoise is an emblem of the Mojave Desert, but this species and many other Mojave Desert species are at risk from the increasing pressures of development and urbanization. Due to these increasing pressures, and in combination with observations of rapid population declines throughout much of the tortoise's range, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service listed the desert tortoise as an endangered species under the Endangered Species Act in August of 1989, with a formal ruling designating the desert tortoise as a threatened species in the following year, 1990. This ruling would have a dramatic impact on housing and commercial development in the Las Vegas Valley, in essence, establishing a building moratorium.
When the desert tortoise got listed, obviously all of the Mojave is habitat to the desert tortoise. It was a shock to the development community.
When the desert tortoise was listed, many affected entities, including the state of Nevada, the city of Las Vegas, and the Southern Nevada Home Builders Association, filed a lawsuit against the Secretary of the Interior to invalidate the listing.
Right after the listing, which was on August 4th of 1989, I was working in government affairs for the Southern Nevada Home Builders Association, which obviously was the most affected industry. And so my role was to understand what the Endangered Species Act was, what the listing of the desert tortoise meant for development, and what could be done about it. And so researching found the Habitat Conservation Plan process, the various mechanisms within the law to allow development to occur regardless of the presence or absence of a desert tortoise.
Following a series of failed legal actions designed to overturn the listing of the desert tortoise, Clark County and local municipalities created a short-term habitat conservation plan designed to mitigate the desert tortoise issue and lift the building moratorium until a more permanent solution could be developed.
It was important for the development industry to have somebody who could bring all the parties together, recognize the global picture, and get the economy going while doing what the community needed to do to preserve parts of the Mojave Desert for the desert tortoise.
At the county, we primarily thought we should negotiate this, try to come up with a way to resolve it that would work for all concerned. And that resulted, first of all, in a short-term habitat plan that required developers to do certain things if they wanted to move forward on the land.
People had to collect the tortoises on their developing lands and pay a mitigation fee of $550 an acre to develop that land and to blade it. But the tortoises had to be collected and then transferred to the Tortoise Conservation Center, where they could be studied.
In May of 1996, the county and other local governments authorized the preparation of a habitat conservation plan that would not only protect the desert tortoise, but could also be implemented to mitigate impacts to a broad range of animal and plant species and their habitats. In November of 1999, the Clark County Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan was submitted to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and 2 years later, the plan was approved and a new permit was issued that covered 78 species.
The thinking behind the MSHCP was to widen the list of species that was being considered in the Habitat Conservation Plan to hopefully avoid any future listings of species under the Endangered Species Act. Given the experience that the county had had with the listing of the desert tortoise and its impacts on potential development here in southern Nevada, the community wanted to get ahead of that curve and not have another situation where there was an emergency listing of a species that could be so impactful to our economy. So the MSHCP was a broader look at other species here in southern Nevada and looking at those species with an eye towards those that might be listed in the future, including them in a habitat conservation plan to prevent future listings and to make sure that they were conserved during additional development activities.
Well, one of the things I've learned in government is this: if it hasn't been done before, we're not going to do it. Government doesn't take chances. But here, we had to take a chance because we had no other alternative. It isn't anything that we get, well, let's do it the way we used to do it. You couldn't do that.
The Clark County Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan provides a streamlined process for compliance with the Endangered Species Act by private landowners.
Timing was the big issue, because if it took you a year to get a site permitted because of all the mitigation and all the things you had to do on every specific site, time is money. It costs developers a lot of money to have property sitting there not being able to be built on. And what the multi-species habitats did was took that time out of the equation. Now you paid a fee and you could get your site permitted. So it eliminated 6 months, 8 months, sometimes a year in terms of having to permit each particular site. So we didn't have to go out and walk every site and do tortoise mitigation surveys on every single site. It sped things up quite a bit, and I believe in the long run it's been a cheaper, more effective way for development to continue in Las Vegas Valley.
Mitigation fees are collected from developers and are used to implement conservation actions that offset the impacts of development. Payment of mitigation fees provide developers coverage under the countywide permit and allow developers to proceed without additional consultation and permitting under the Endangered Species Act.
Absent the MSHCP, private property owners would have to go through their typical land use and zoning applications, then obtain building permits, then also apply for individual endangered species permits with the Federal Fish and Wildlife Services. The MSHCP has many important partners. Without their cooperation and support of private landowners, businesses, and industry, the MSHCP wouldn't be possible. Some of the best-selling master plan communities in the United States were developed under the MSHCP, including Summerlin, Mountain's Edge, and Inspirata. M Resort and more recent projects like the IKEA project are also examples of projects that were constructed without any delay or interruption for environmental permitting provided through the MSHCP.
Clark County is the administrator of the program on behalf of all of the municipalities and the Nevada Department of Transportation. The permittees are the City of Boulder City, the City of Henderson, the City of Las Vegas, City of North Las Vegas, City of Mesquite, Clark County, and also Nevada Department of Transportation.
The Desert Conservation Program implements a variety of conservation actions. Some of these conservation actions include managing the Boulder City Conservation Easement and establishing the riparian reserves to offset development. Public information and education is also a requirement of the MSHCP. Since the emergency listing of the desert tortoise in 1989, Clark County and the permittees have worked to develop and implement a balanced approach to development and conservation. While the MSHCP was not formally approved until 2001, Clark County has been engaged in ecosystem-based habitat conservation planning and implementation for nearly 2 decades. Since the MSHCP and the permit were approved in February 2001, the permittees have developed more than 92,000 acres of the 145,000 acres authorized by the permit. To offset this development, the permittees fund mitigation actions, including research, law enforcement, resource protection, tortoise fencing, public information, and education, as well as restoration projects.
The goals of the MSHCP are to conserve species here in Clark County that are impacted by our development activities. So the whole construct of the plan is to balance economic development with conservation of the species covered in the plan. So the goal is to make sure that whatever development activities occur, that we're doing conservation projects that offset those impacts to species that are covered in the plan.
Since 2001, the Desert Conservation Program has achieved the following: initiated or completed all of the 22 conditions specifically identified in the permit, constructed 400 miles of roadside fencing to help protect the desert tortoise, transferred more than 10,000 desert tortoises to the Desert Tortoise Conservation Center, retired more than 1.9 million acres of grazing allotments and associated water rights in Clark County, reached more than 8,000 Clark County School District students each year through Mojave Max assemblies, received more than 40,000 entries in the Mojave Max Emergence Contest since 2000, participated in outreach events reaching more than 150,000 residents and visitors each year.
My priority is to ensure that the funds generated from the development are used for projects that will lead to the delisting of desert tortoise and other listed species in Clark County. It's important to me that we're no longer regulated under the Endangered Species Act. We need to demonstrate to our constituents that these conservation investments are working and that the plants and animals protected by these federally required plans are effective.
When plants and animals are in trouble, people are too. So for the health of the environment and for the health of the people who live in that environment, the plants and the animals have to be healthy too.
I think it was more of an attitude transformation that made the HCP so great. The fact that it was the first of its kind, the first that it was revolutionary, the fact that it was one of the first times a larger urban community looked at a way to coexist with its ecosystem. But what was really significant was that awareness that was created in Southern Nevada, that we live in a certain desert community and we have to coexist with that desert. We cannot transform it in complete ignorance and complete denial of that which it naturally is.
Today, the Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan is providing for regional conservation of species native to the Mojave Desert, while at the same time providing long-term assurances for continued economic growth in the Las Vegas Valley.